Choosing Life by ginnyrules27. Chapter 56. I'm sorry if you can hear something in the background. There are people with power tools, but I don't have much time. Haddie took a deep breath as he rolled his shoulders to loosen them, before he grinned as he looked around at all his friends that had gathered in Lacey Legume's dance studio. He had commandeered the dance studio for a very special purpose. It was his and Alexandria's anniversary, and by gum, he wanted to make it one to remember. Lacey had been kind enough to give him lessons for the years, both on the Isle, though they had to do it in secret, and in Oridon, and now it seemed like all that practice would finally pay off. "I still think you're insane," Celia told him, and Haddie looked over at her. "I mean, the dance would be enough, but are you seriously wearing black?" "Actually, he's not," Dizzy said as she spoke up. "I know the scene in question that we're performing had everyone wearing black, but I didn't want anyone to be too uncomfortable. So, for us VKs at least, I made our outfits the shade of midnight blue. It's the darkest shade of blue there is, and could often be mistaken for black. Plus, it won't clash with Haddie's hair." Working with Evie sure has paid off for you, huh, Diz?" Celia said, and Haddie smiled as Lacey went over and kissed Dizzy on the cheek. Oh yeah, that had been a fun surprise for Haddie and Celia to discover. They had gone over to Evie Four Hearts to surprise Dizzy and bring her some lunch one day, only to find her mid-kiss with the youngest Legume girl. Dizzy had been worried that they would be mad, but Celia reminded her that they didn't care that Harriet liked girls or that Dustin liked guys. The only thing they cared about was that they somehow made Dizzy feel like she couldn't tell them. They had treated Dizzy to all her favourite things to try to make up to her. It had only been recently that Dizzy had told them that she and Lacey had been trying to take things slow, and that was why she didn't say anything. She would have told them that day, but they had been so determined to do all her favourite things to make it up to her that she didn't have the heart to say anything. Well, at least them finding out also led to Celia finally bringing up Cyrus into the fold and introducing him to the group. The Hun boy was rather quiet, but as long as he treated his friend the way he should, Haddie didn't care if Cyrus didn't say one word to him. "Hard to believe how much has changed," Evan said from his spot next to Hermie Fitzherbert, nee Bing, the two of them having gotten married about a year after Mal had given birth to Effie and Reese. "In a good way, though." Melody shook her head in amusement. "Honestly, I don't think anything's really changed, other than the fact we've all kind of paired off. Well, except for Herky." "Look, Makari has somehow got Gil. I don't know how Herky's gonna surprise us when the time comes for him to get himself a partner." He chuckled before tossing Evan a small box. "Keep that safe for me? Just like we practiced." Evan nodded, pocketing the box. CJ shook her head. "Honestly, Haddie, do you really expect us not to notice that was a ring box you just tossed to Evan?" "Yeah, and do you really expect us not to put two and two together that we've been practicing the dance from Alexandria's favourite scene from one of her favourite movies?" Ashaki asked. "You're going to propose to her." "Well, I won't if you manage to spoil the surprise." Haddie shook his head. "I've been studying that scene for months, and the fact that it ends with the two of them in the room alone—" "Then we shall say no more on the subject," Robert said, and nodded at Haddie before gently placing a hand on Ashaki's stomach. Haddie had to smile at the sight. Sure, it was a little strange that his perpetually single friend had gotten married and was having a kid before he was, but at the same time, Ashaki and Robert had pretty much been a couple since they had met, much to Aziz and Amir's shock and Rachel and Emma's amusement. Of course, when Ashaki and Robert had met was practically a mystery to Haddie, but at this point, he expected as much. His friends, who were like to poke their noses into his love life, were often more secretive about their own. But he had invited to the wedding. Robert even asked him to be a groomsman, since all the other rats had been asked. "Anyone got a change of subject before I start grilling Ash about how her pregnancy's going?" Haddie asked. "Do it and I throw a shoe at you. And it won't necessarily be mine." Ashaki said. "Bad enough Amir's been texting me every chance he gets. If he didn't have 2 kids, I know he'd practically be living with me and Robert." "Georgia and Rick are a couple," Lacey spoke up. "I'm sorry, Rick isn't Rick Radcliffe." CJ said. Is there another Rick from the Isle? Lacey asked. Your sister is dating Ratcliffe's son. Why does this seem to be something that surprises you? Ryan said as he shook his head. We're off the Isle. Anyone can do as they please. I'm with CJ in all honesty, Neil said. I don't even know this Rick guy, but I've met Georgia from the few times she's brought us snacks when Lacey's been training us. And if CJ's shocked, then maybe this Ryan guy is bad news. It'd be madness to think otherwise. Grace White, nee Hatter, snorted in amusement as she rested a hand on her husband's shoulder. Honestly, Neil, what's life without a little madness every once in a while? And if George is happy, then isn't that what matters? Save your overprotectiveness for your nephew and niece. You do realise I technically have 2 nieces, right? With Eloise being your sister's daughter? Yes, but Paige has her husband to be overprotective of her child. And Emma doesn't have a mare? Touché. Oh, speaking of nieces, how is Felicity? Hattie asked as he looked over at Celia, hoping to change the subject slightly from the strange debate between Grace and Neil were going through. Uma gave birth as well, from what Malice told me, didn't she? She did, Celia said. Mila Melinda Hook is doing very well, and Helena is quite pleased to be a big sister. Felicity is thriving, though I think she's going to be an only child from what little Freddie's told me through the procedures they had to go through. CJ's also doing fine. Thank you all for asking, Ryan said, and CJ snorted in amusement. Right, it's been like 2 months since I gave birth. She said, they all saw Cameron when we brought him home. Remember? And how Harry handling no longer being the only male Hook on this side of the bridge? Robert asked. If he could make my son his first mate, he would. CJ snorted in amusement. Of course, probably doesn't hurt that we named him Harrison as Cameron's middle name. First middle name, you mean? Ryan said. Ryan, we agreed to hyphenate our last names. That does not designate your last name as a middle name. CJ told her husband. How's Harriet doing? Speaking of kids from your side of the family. Hattie asked CJ, cutting off their argument. That he was sure was coming. Mal mentioned Harriet and Sammy were trying to have a kid of their own. But I haven't had anything from Mal about that. Harriet's still not pregnant, CJ said. But that's all she'll tell me. Alas, the curse of being the youngest child. No matter how old you get, your siblings still try to shield you from bad news. Evan, Neil, Shaki and Melody all snorted in agreement. I'll take your word for it. Philip Jr. shook his head. Audrey was never really one to hide the awful truth from me. But then again, neither was Leah for that matter. Phil, the darling man who is the father of my children, just because Leah was insane. Melody said, and Phil Jr. shook his head in amazement. I mean, she's not wrong, but what are all you guys standing around here for? Alexandria asked, and everyone turned to see the youngest charming child standing in the doorway, looking somewhat bemused. Hey, you! Hattie said with a grin before he rushed over and gave her a hug before kissing the top of her head. Happy anniversary. Happy anniversary to you too. Alexandria said with a small chuckle. What's all this? It's your gift. Hattie said. Wait here. We need to get changed. Well, I guess you do too, Buttercup. Dread Pirate Roberts, what are you doing? Alexandria asked with a teasing note to her voice, as Melody and Ashaki rushed over and gently took her by the hand to the dressing room. Hattie made his way to his designated changing room and changed into the aforementioned midnight blue suit. Dizzy had done an amazing job. While it looked like he was wearing black, it didn't make his skin crawl or make him feel like he was betraying Mal in any way. Not exactly the feeling you wanted to have when he was proposing. I mean, yeah, black looks okay on Dad, but he wears more smoky dark grey as opposed to true black. Hattie said, and yes, I know Carlos has reclaimed his colour, but there's been too many years of black being tied to the French fanatic from the Isle to as opposed to Carlos. Tying his shoes, trying not to feel jealous that Neil got to wear the Converses instead of the dress shoes, Hattie made his way back to the dance floor. Looking good there, Hats, Melody said, giving her cousin a gentle punch to the arm. All that training with Herky's been good for you. You mean Flame Top here works more than just his brain? Celia teased with a small chuckle. Hey! Hattie shook his head. He knew it was good-natured teasing, but he couldn't call himself a VK if he didn't protest some form of another, despite the fact it had been years since he had been a kid. All teasing or any conversation halted as Alexandria stepped out and Hattie had to work to make sure his jaw didn't drop at the sight of her. Sure, she was only wearing a plain black dress, black leggings and heels, and had her hair pulled up in a ponytail. But to Hattie, she looked as beautiful as Aphrodite. "You sure you're ready for this?" Hattie asked as he brought his brain, finally, decided to work and brought Alexandria close to him, so they were standing in promenade. "If I am correct, we're performing my favourite dance scene ever to be put on film. Shouldn't I be asking you that question?" Alexandria asked with a playful smile, as Lacey pressed play on the stereo before pocketing the remote and taking her spot with Dizzy. Upon hearing the strum of the guitar and the first words of the song, Alexandria's smirk grew into a smile. This was something she knew by heart, both the dance and her partner. It helped that they had been dance partners at functions for a couple of years by that point, so dancing with each other felt natural. Every move was as if they had been doing it all their lives. From the caminada to the pronada, before shifting into a rock step, which led them back into the caminada. The flow of the dance felt natural, almost as if she was a little girl again, and Ben or Chad were dancing with her. The thought of Hattie taking Ben or Chad's spot as her partner seemed almost too ridiculous for words, no matter how much she loved her boyfriend, and she had to stop as she seemed to have a small giggle fit. "You okay?" Hattie asked as the rest of the group paused. "I'm fine," Alexandria said as she calmed down, before looking around. "Did you plan for this?" "Hey, I wanted to give you as an accurate experience as I could," Hattie said with a small smile, and held out his hand once more. Alexandria gently placed her hand in his, and the dance resumed, with heads turning left and right, and Alexandria couldn't help but stare into Hattie's eyes as she mentally prepared for the next move. "How did I get so lucky?" Alexandria thought, as Hattie gave her a small smile, before the group made their way to the other side of the dance studio, the balls of their feet sliding against the floor before Hattie took Alexandria's hand in his once more, and the group made their way back across the dance floor, with the women kicking up a leg before both men and women bent down into a lunge. "Hattie's lucky he's my friend and crewmate." "Hattie's lucky he's my friend and crewmate. Otherwise I'd kill him for having someone who's 2 months past birth doing lunges," Alexandria heard CJ mutter. She didn't have much of a chance to respond, as Alexandria and Hattie spun under his arm, and the group made their way back to the other end of the dance studio. Alexandria wasn't going to lie. She was very impressed with how Hattie wasn't glancing at his feet. Even she was nervous as how her feet were overlapping with the other, and she had practically had the dance memorized. Taking a quick glance down at the floor to make sure she wasn't in danger of stepping on Hattie's foot, though she wasn't sure how much damage she could do to her Olympian boyfriend, Alexandria had to smile as she was twirled so that her back was against Hattie's chest, her right hand resting on top of his as he held her close. The dancers broke off from the line, and Hattie gracefully led the two of them into the centre of the room, his face still dangerously close to Alexandria's. Had they not been in a room filled with their friends, and family in Hattie's case, Alexandria was sure they would have been kissing by this point. Out of the corner of her eye, Alexandria saw one of Hattie's legs sweep back, and she had to admit she was surprised with how detailed he had been with this dance. She knew the move that came next, and she wouldn't have faulted Hattie for leaving out the part where he would have to lift her up. But it only took a blink of her eyes for Hattie to bring her arm over his before he lifted her up off her feet and spun her around. Alexandria smiled as she felt herself come down to earth, Hattie holding her close in his arms. Their foreheads touched before Hattie leaned down to whisper into her ear. "You ready to show off?" "What do you—" "I told you, Alex. We practiced all of this dance. But if you don't think you can—" Alexandria shook her head before breaking from the embrace to begin to dance. Sure enough, the contemporary moves were not traditional to the tango, but as Hattie said, they wanted to make it as authentic as possible. It wasn't long, though, before the rest of the group joined in, and the contemporary moves melted back into the traditional tango, as Hattie and Alexandria went back and forth with each other. Hattie's hands on her hips and his megawatt smile melting her heart. "And we're lunging again." Alexandria heard Ashaki mutter. "Why are there so many lunges?" "It's not that bad," Robert told her. "You're not in heels. Or pregnant." Alexandria snorted in amusement, and Hattie shook his head as the two of them spun once again under each other's arms, before heading back to the other side of the studio. Their feet crisscrossing over each other once more, only this time neither of them looked anywhere but in each other's eyes. Pausing in the centre of the room, Hattie gently spun Alexandria around, his face dangerously close to hers. She wasn't going to lie. She was a bit disappointed when he walked off, and the rest of their friends surrounded her. Though, had Evan handed Hattie something? Nah, was probably a trick of the light. Smiling when she saw Hattie once more, Alexandria's hands met his, and everything seemed to slow down as the rest of the group danced off, leaving the two of them to their lonesome. Alexandria wasn't even nervous as Hattie picked her up so that she was horizontal to the ground before spinning her slowly. She had complete trust in him. Hattie gently placed her back on the ground as the spinning stopped and slowly dipped Alexandria towards the ground before the two of them spun once more. The music picked up and the two of them smiled at each other as they continued to dance. Hattie dipping Alexandria once more as the music paused before bringing her back upright. Alexandria spun out of his arms before grinning at him. Hattie couldn't help but raise an eyebrow before quickly picking Alexandria up once more so that her legs wrapped around his body as they spun. Setting her down on the ground, Hattie couldn't help but pant slightly as his forearm met hers, and the two of them stared into each other's eyes as the music finally faded out. "Gods, I love that scene, but I think I'm too old. But I think I'm old enough now to admit there was no reason for it to go that hard," Alexandria chuckled, before pausing as she realised their arms were still intertwined. "Hats, you can let go now? Hats, you know you can let go now."
"Oh, yeah, but I had a question for you,"
Hattie said. "Yes, we can go to your father's restaurant for dinner," Alexandria teased.
"Oh, that wasn't even up for debate."
Hattie chuckled before slipping his arm out from hers and bending down on one knee.
"And it wasn't my question."
"Hattie."
"I love you, Lexi,"
Hattie said, using his nickname for Alexandria when they were home alone.
"I love the way your eyes sparkle as you're working on an embroidery project. I love the way you go all in when you're practicing a dance. I love the way your hair flies in the wind as you're flying on your horse. And I love how loyal you are. You could have found anyone else back when I was in my month-long coma, but you didn't."
"Why would I?" Alexandria asked. "I love you, goof." Hattie chuckled and pulled a ring box out of his pocket and opened it. Alexandria gasped when she saw the ring. It was a beautiful golden band with a gorgeous single sapphire sitting in a bed of small diamonds.
"Alexandria Charming, will you marry me?"
Hattie asked. Alexandria didn't answer, but instead tackled Hattie in a hug that almost knocked him over.
"I'll take that as a yes."
"You bet it's a yes!" Alexandria grinned before gently giving Hattie a kiss on the lips. She looked at him as they separated. "You're okay with Chad as your brother-in-law, right?"
"Only if you're okay with Mal and Araya as your sisters-in-law."
"Why wouldn't I be okay with that?"
"Exactly."
Alexandria snorted slightly. "You're a goof. You know that, right?"
"A goof you're going to marry," Hattie said with a grin as he helped her up off the floor. "Now, come on, let's get changed. And I do believe we have a date with some garlic crispy chicken."
"You know we'll have to tell our families, right?" Alexandria said as she put on the ring and held it up to admire it. "Also, please tell me you didn't ask my father for permission. I mean, you're a god, so you don't really need to."
"Of course I did," Hattie said. "Chad, Bobby and Roland all asked permission to marry their respective wives. I wasn't going to be the one to ruin the tradition, even if it's slightly ridiculous and outdated."
"Huh. Slightly ridiculous and outdated could be Auradon's motto, Alexandria said with a grin as the two of them walked off, eager for their dinner and to tell their families the good news. Harry could only help his father's freak out would be minimal. End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed that one. Ginny as gorgeous as ever. That was lovely. I could picture that in my head, and I don't even know the dance routine. But God, we've known Harry since he was born. And now he's engaged. I feel like a big sister myself. Ah, that was lovely. Anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe and hit that bell to get notified for whenever I upload a new video. Have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, gals and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Take care.